Hey everybody, welcome to Poetry. Today we will be reviewing figurative language, poetic sound devices, and types of rhymes. So let's get started. If you remember, we talked about different types of figurative language. And figurative language, if you remember, we don't take the meaning of it literally or for its exact meaning. So let's just review some of these types of figurative language. So the first one is a simile. So if you remember, a simile compares two things using the words like or as. So an example, I am as fast as a cheetah. That means that I'm comparing my speed to the speed of a cheetah. Number two is metaphor. You're doing the same thing. You're comparing two things, but you're not using the words like or as. So an example, you are going to get a boatload of papers. You're not actually getting a boat filled with papers, but what that means is you're going to get a lot of papers. Number three is personification. Remember, the root word in personification is person. So remember, it's a type of metaphor where we give human characteristics to things that are not human things. So for example, we talked about dancing clouds. The clouds aren't actually dancing or doing the disco, but what it could mean is that they're moving very quickly, or maybe they're moving very slowly like a waltz. Trees were speaking to me. Well, the trees aren't actually having a conversation with you, but it feels something like that. Automatopoeia. If you remember, that was my favorite word. And remember, automatopoeia are words that sound like the word. Or if you remember, we talked about sound effects. Remember the old Batman TV show? And if you haven't watched it, you should probably watch it at some point, because then you'll understand what I'm talking about. Here's some examples. So when you say shh, it sounds like the word. Pow, zip, drip, or swoosh. Those are some examples. Number five is alliteration. So remember that alliteration has the same beginning letter and or the same beginning sound. And remember, we talked about alliteration being like a tongue twister. So for example, Peter Piper picked a pair of pickles. The same beginning letter would be the letter P, but the same beginning sound would be the P sound. So that's an example of an alliteration. Number six is hyperbole, and I think you all know now what a hyperbole is, but it's an exaggeration that is definitely not true. And just remember my awesome story that I told you about my 40-foot long fish that I caught, because you know I did, wink wink. The last one is idiom. So if you remember, we watched a video on it, and remember that the words or phrases are not meant to be taken for its literal or exact meaning. So remember in that video, the example was you're driving me up the wall. Well, remember, we're not actually taking a car and driving up the wall. What that phrase means is that you're driving me crazy. So that's a review of figurative language. The next thing we're going to talk about are poetic sound devices. So these are things that you will hear when you read poetry. The first one is repetition. So this could be the same word or words, phrase or phrases, and they're seen more than once in either a poem or a song. So in this example that I've given you, this is a song. The song is called Life is a Highway. It's done by Rascal Flatts. So look at what's being repeated. It says, life is a highway. I want to ride it all night long. If you're going my way, I want to drive it all night long. Well, what's the repetition? The repetition is the phrase or the words all night long. They're repeated more than once. So that is an example of repetition. The next poetic sound device is consonants. And if you think about what the possible root word is, I mean, you can see it there, the root word would be consonant. So a consonant An example means that it has the same consonant sound. So let's take a look at this quote. I want you to try to figure out what's the same consonant sound in this quote. I must confess that in my quest I felt depressed and restless. And that is by Thin Lizzy. Can you think of what the same consonant sound is? If you guess the same consonant sound of the letter S, you're right. Take a look at some of our examples. When we have must, confess, quest, depressed, restless, it all has that S sound. So that is an example of consonants. The last one is actually the opposite of consonants, and it's called assonants. And that's the same vowel sound. So take a look at this little part of a poem, and I want you to figure out what is the same vowel sound. All mammals named Sammy must be clammy. Can you guess what vowel is being repeated? Well, the vowel sound, I should say, that's being repeated is that A sound. So for example, all, so we have the all sound, mammals, so that sound, named, Sam, so we kind of have the A's there, and then clammy. So those would be examples of assonants. Now these two right here, consonants and assonants, you don't need to know exactly for sure. You'll learn about that more when you get into the upper grades, but for sure you should know what repetition is. So those are some examples of poetic sound devices. Our last thing that we're going to learn about are types of rhymes. So you all have learned about rhyming since you were in kindergarten, but there are specific examples that we find in poetry. So let's go over them. If you have something that is complete rhyme, that means that the ending letters match exactly to the letters below. So for example, if we have this word cloud as our example, these words right here have the exact same spelling and the exact same sound. So let me explain that. Right here, the O-U-D makes the oud sound. So when we look at these words, we have shroud, O-U-D. That completely rhymes, or if you think of it this way, it exactly matches the same sound as cloud. Crowd. Now notice we have a W here, but does it make the same sound as the oud in cloud? Yes, it does. So that's why those would exactly match. Proud, loud. Again, has the exact same sounding ending sound as cloud. So those would be examples of complete rhyme. Partial rhyme is just a little bit different. So again, if we still use that same word cloud and we look at these words, it's kind of like they do kind of rhyme, but they're not exact. That's what partial rhyme means. Parts of it match, but not completely. So let's take a look. Round. Well, it has that ow sound, but doesn't really have the N sound, so it kind of rhymes. So that would match with partial rhyme. These two would partially rhyme. Same thing with brown, shout, and plow. They have the ow sound, but maybe not exactly that ending sound of the D. So they kind of rhyme. So again, that would be your partial rhyme. Our next one is internal rhyme. Internal rhyme means that there's a word inside of these lines that matches with this ending word. So let's see if you can figure it out. I am a cat who wears a hat. What word in this phrase or in this line matches with hat? Well, it's cat. And notice that it's inside of this quote. That's an example of internal rhyme. This word is inside of the quote and it matches with the last word of the quote. Same thing with this one. When in the fog, I jog. I look at my ending word, jog. Well, what word on the inside of this quote rhymes with jog? Well, it's fog. So that is another example of internal rhyme. The last example of types of rhymes is end rhyme. So if I use this quote, what we do is we look at the very last word of each line. And these words at the end of each line should have rhyme. If they both match, then that's an example of end rhyme. So let's take a look at this quote. Yes, it's true, I am a cat. When I go out, I wear a hat. See how cat and hat are at the end of the line? That would be an example of end rhyme. So all of these are examples of types of rhymes that we use in poetry. So to get some practice, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to go on to IXL, Language Arts 4th grade, and go to L2, Identify Elements of Poetry. All of those things that we just talked about with figurative language, poetic sound devices, and types of rhymes will be in L2. See how many you can get right. Take about 5 minutes and set a goal for yourself, either 70, 80, 90, or 100%. Good luck, and I'll see you next time when we learn more about poetry.